Hey, good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in live to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm Andy Leach, Senior Director of Museum and Archival Collections for the Rock Hall, and I'm very excited to be hosting tonight's event featuring 1993 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee John Densmore of The Doors. Before we get started, I want to mention just a few things we want you to know about here at the Rock Hall. Our museum here in Cleveland is open every day, so please go to rockhall.com to get more info, to get your tickets. Our museum is one of the safest places you can visit. We have a bunch of great new exhibits that we've opened recently and that will be opening soon. And one exhibit I specifically want to mention is our brand new exhibit that opens later this week, and it's called The Biggest Show on Turf: 55 Years of Halftime Shows. For those who don't know, this year's NFL draft will be hosted right here in Cleveland. And to help celebrate that, we've put together this big new exhibit that honors the history of the Super Bowl halftime shows and all those legendary musicians that have performed at those shows with artifacts from those performances. So that exhibit opens this Friday, April 23rd, and will be on display through September. We would also love to urge you to become a member if you haven't already. So much of what we do here at the Rock Hall is made possible through the support of our members. And if you don't already have a membership, please consider joining us as a member. You can find more information at rockhall.com about that as well. And we also encourage you to check out our online store, where we have a great selection of merchandise for music lovers of all kinds. At our online store, we actually now have a limited number of signed copies of John Densmore's new book, The Seekers: Meetings with Remarkable Musicians and Other Artists, which we're going to talk about tonight. So go there to the store at rockhall.com and get one of those. And finally, I want to make sure to mention that you'll be able to hear this interview on Sirius XM in the coming weeks. So look out for that. And we want to thank our great partners at Sirius XM, as always. So now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our special guest tonight. As the drummer for The Doors, John Densmore was always far more than merely the rhythmic engine of that band, strongly influenced by jazz drummers like Elvin Jones and Brazilian grooves and other influences. John brought a highly evolved sense of dynamics, structure, and musicality to his beats. And after being a musician since his childhood, in the mid-'60s, John teamed up with guitarist Robbie Krieger, and shortly thereafter with keyboardist Ray Manzarek and the singer Jim Morrison to form The Doors. And of course, The Doors went on to become, one of the greatest and most influential bands of the 60s and of all time. They were unlike any other band at that time and ever since. The Doors put out a string of several classic albums that still endure to this day, including the great L.A. Woman, which was released 50 years ago today. And hopefully John and I can talk about that album a little bit. So I want to mention too, his autobiography, Riders on the Storm: My Life with Jim Morrison and The Doors, was published in 1991. It was a New York Times bestseller. And also the book, The Doors Unhinged, was published in 2013. I highly recommend both of these books. So please check them out. John has also written articles and essays for Rolling Stone and many other magazines and syndicated newspapers. His most recent book, as I mentioned, The Seekers: Meetings with Remarkable Musicians, was published in November 2020. And this book will be the focus of our interview this evening. I have to mention he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of The Doors in 1993. We're thrilled to have him joining us from his home in California, from the intersection of Morrison and Densmore, it looks like. Let's welcome the great John Densmore.
Hey, thanks, Andy. Wow, thanks for sending all that helium up my skull.
No problem.
Great to see you again virtually. I remember in 2013 it was, I did a signing at the Rock Hall for Unhinged, my second. I have 3 self-centered memoirs now. And I remember you showing me the archives, and it was great. So anyway, nice to see you again.
It's so good to see you too. Yeah, it was a great event in 2013, and so how have you been doing lately? Especially over the past year? How's the past year been treating you?
Well, the last many years I've kind of turned into a writer, and so writers are kind of like monks in a cave anyway. So I'm sort of like, well, okay, I know about this. So I'm looking for music in between sentences primarily. And so I'm doing okay. And, I'm saddened by all the loss and the ominous COVID cloud. I got my jab the other day, and I'm good. And no blood clots. So don't worry, folks. We got to all get in this together, and we will be getting out of it, hopefully in the fall.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we need. Well, I want to dig into this this great book, The Seekers, which I really enjoyed, I got to say. And you've had the opportunity to meet and interact with some of the most extraordinary people, and you devote chapters to a lot of them in this book. So, for those out there who may not know, can you kind of describe what the new book is and what inspired it?
Yeah, sure. It's my tip of the hat to musicians who fed me. And there was this book called Meetings with Remarkable Men by this Armenian Russian mystic in the 1800s. And it was about musicians trying to play so well that they caught God's ear. And I heard the title and I went, Meetings with Remarkable Musicians. There's my title. Mm-hmm. And I'll read you a little excerpt that kind of sets it up. Inspired by this idea, I've assembled my own group of what I would call musical masters who achieved their mystical destiny through sound. From Ravi Shankar to Patti Smith, Jim Morrison to Janis Joplin, Bob Marley to Gustavo Dudamel, Lou Reed to Van Morrison, Jerry Lee Lewis to my dear late Doors bandmate Ray Manzarek. Just as painters see the world, musicians' primary compass through life is their ears. Like my colleagues, I hear the world, and the one constant thread through my life so far is that I have been constantly fed and nourished by music, as you obviously have been, right? Being a rock and roll dude.
Absolutely. And as I think, as you mentioned in the book, people, some of the non-musicians that you've interacted with, like the writers, I think, like you said a minute ago, they kind of, you can see that they kind of find music in between the interacted with, like the writers, I think, like you said.
Well, I have this theory personally that when I write, the length of a sentence is a musical question. If it's short, then it's kind of percussive, and if it's long, then it's sort of melodic, or it's too long and it's a run-on, and you better edit. So that's, and I also when I feel stuck, I'll read the paragraph out loud, and that will tell me a lot because the sound.
Well, so it's a really extraordinary group of people that are featured in the book, and including 9 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, I might add.
9?
9 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, and maybe even a couple who should be, or who may be someday.
Yeah.
But definitely. So can you talk about, especially since, like I said, there are more than just musicians, but also artists and poets and other folks. Can you talk about what it is in your mind that all these people kind of have in common?
Yeah, sound. And even the mystics like Ram Dass, he's a meditative guru type. Sound and silence go together. I write a bit about silence. Without silence, if you have all sound, there's no contrast. And it's really important. And that has to do with meditation, which is, the Doors met at a Maharishi meditation class. It's about a year before the Beatles got on the Maharishi. But there's something to calming the mind. And it also has to do with music, something about music that, during these difficult times, you put on a record and you get fed, your soul gets medicine somehow. The sound can make you calm or excited, and right. So that's the connection.
And I think at one point you even talk about, and I love how silence kind of becomes a theme, maybe toward halfway through the book. And you mentioned that the book is really about sound, but yeah, silence is something maybe we take for granted, even as musicians. It's something we don't think about enough, but it's certainly really important, not only in music, but like you said, in in other parts of our lives too.
Yeah, and when a musician is taking a solo, for example, like Willie Nelson or something, there's a lot of, rather than showing off all your licks continually, you breathe a little and give a little space. And that's kind of like the human condition, because we're not excited all the time and we're not calm all the time. And I saw the young classical music conductor Gustavo Dudamel from the LA Philharmonic. He's just this wonder king. He's like in his 30s and memorizes Beethoven and Mozart from memory. But he would finish his symphony, 20 minutes of Beethoven, and then he'd keep his arms up. And so we knew we're not supposed to applaud yet. And he'd have like a minute of silence after all that sound. And it was the most powerful silence you can imagine. That's why I'm whispering. And then we applauded. So it's, there's a lesson everywhere. Classical, rock and roll, whatever.
Yeah, there's even a really cool episode in the book where you're at a party, I think, where Van Morrison is playing a song. And at the end, he just stops, right? And everyone just sits and I guess soaks up the silence.
He was doing Astral Weeks, but it hadn't been recorded yet or anything. He was sort of experimenting with the songs at a little party, and they were so powerful that we all got real quiet.
Yeah. Well, and you identify these people too throughout the book, of course, in the title even as seekers. One thing I think I didn't realize till you pointed it out, maybe toward the end of the book, that Oliver Stone actually calls you a survivor and a seeker on the back of Riders on the Storm 30 years ago. So you're a seeker too. And I think the first time you used the term is in the chapter about Jim Morrison. So tell us what in your mind is a seeker.
Yeah, well, I'm going to jump to a little thing in the conclusion where I say, to get lost in something you love. That's the ticket. Doesn't have to be writing a symphony. It can be doing something that no one will ever see or hear, but in the moment when you're doing it, infinity creeps in. Professional musician or not, we are all seekers. So make room every day for your practice. Music, painting, mindful walking, whatever gives you space, and you'll receive the balance needed for that day's challenges. In the tumultuous times such as these in America in the early 21st century, the soul appreciates the chance to tap into infinite resources of creativity that can be accessed in any situation. Just be mindful, can be creative.
Yeah. And the book is truly about creativity and the creative process. And it's really kind of a fascinating look at it. And I know, obviously, you've seen the creative process exhibited by, some of the greatest artists ever, including the Doors. Can you talk about kind of anything consistent about the creative process among all these different kinds of remarkable people?
Yeah, in the book, I quote Neil deGrasse Tyson, the nuclear physicist, who blew my mind when he said that, yes, the Earth has a gravitational pull, but so does all the other planets in the solar system. So as they're all going around, they're all pushing and pulling on each other, just like a musical ensemble, And if someone gets too excited, they spin off like a shooting star. And so, it's kind of interesting that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there something that we can learn from people like this if we're looking to live a more creative life? Is there any advice maybe you could give people out there who are artists or musicians who want to stay creative and inspired?
Well, everybody should stay creative and inspired. Making a professional living at it, as we know, is a big crapshoot, and no guarantees. And if you have to do it, then go for it. Otherwise, no insurance here. Get a refrigerator.
Right. I like. There's one point you make in the book that kind of the path toward, I think you maybe even talk about this in an earlier book too, but certainly in this one, where the path toward the goal can be the goal. That's where it's all at. It's where kind of the happiness is, in fact.
That's really, really good, Andy. You know, before the pandemic, I would be playing once in a while at a poetry reading where I read poetry and play hand drums or back up some poet. It's a small venue, few hundred people. And if I was in the moment with the audience, it was as fulfilling as Madison Square Garden, where thousands of people are. And I realized it's the process, not the goal. You know, that's what, I mean, you know, you want to have your stuff reach as many people as possible. But boy, the road there, like I'm always asked, oh, what was the greatest concert ever? And my answer is that, you know, giant mass adulation in arenas is a great high, but really the most exciting time was the transition from small clubs to maybe second bill in small philharmonic halls, a few thousand seats. The realization that, oh my God, we are going to pay the rent. We're going to make a living at doing this. You know, and that, you know, the road there is just heaven.
Yeah. And that's kind of sort of relates to something you talk about, which is the incubation period, where it's that sort of initial time that I think you kind of call out as a really special time in the creative process, where you know, everything's new and exciting. And you were fortunate, obviously, to witness the incubation period of the Doors and probably several of these other artists. Can you talk about that?
It's a precious time when you're something new is being created and you haven't figured out how to sell it, which is the difficult part of the arts. And I stumbled onto reggae in Jamaica before it came to the United States, and I got to see that incubation. And of course, with the Doors, I saw that. And
sure,
Dudamel, I saw him guest conduct the LA Philharmonic. I knew the guy was a genius, and I could see that early passion. So, you know, you started to ask me about Jim, and I'm thinking one of the, I did an audio version of the book where I read the whole thing and created some music under things. Mm-hmm. And the first or the second clip, I think, is about Jim and the very early days. And I play a little percussion, like a little break on through rhythm. Could we cue that up?
Yeah, I think so. There are two with Jim. Is it that we have one that has Ray and Jim, and another about kind of playing with Jim? Would it be the latter?
I think so.
Okay, I think that's chapter 5, part 2.
His 3 musical sidekicks, and it took 3 of us to match the energy of this one person, were lucky and talented enough to figure out the perfect sound bed for Jim to lie down in. When he first sang the Inn a cappella, it struck me as a goodbye love tune. But over time, as we played it in clubs, the middle section stretched out into a king-size bed for Jim to revel in. You could just feel the love and comfort he got from surrendering to the drone-like guitar, the sustained organ, and the trance groove of this song. My intuition told me to take off the snares, a typical rock sound, and play the dark, moody sound of tom-toms instead. Jim felt safe enough, cozy in that sonic bed, to free up his subconscious mind and let out deep, dark, poetic musings. He unearthed the primal, sexual, Oedipal underpinnings of all of our psyches. The blue bus is calling us. Driver, where you taking us? Meet me at the back of the blue bus, doing the blue rock on a blue bus, yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, well, that wasn't the clip I was thinking of.
Oh, okay.
No,
well, we can go to that one.
I'm going to read live what I was thinking of. And that really exemplified, well, I'm playing the beat to the end behind all of that.
Right.
And I put in some sitar droning, and
Uh-huh.
it just kind of, you can feel the spaciousness in there, room for Jim's poetry, and
Yeah.
there it is.
That's great. Yeah, I love the drumming. It's very well, I was going to say it sounds very Elvin Jones, and I want to talk about him too. But while we're on Jim though, I did want to ask you, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's the first time you used the term seeker, and maybe it's the first time you'd encountered somebody who you would consider a seeker in your life. But what was it obvious right from the beginning that Jim was someone who was seeking something, kind of looking beyond what most of us see or looking for?
That's a perfect setup, Andy, for the clip I was thinking of playing. So I'm going to read it.
Okay.
All right? Chapter 5, Jim Morrison, the Shaman. With your feet on the ground, the earth spirits rise up the legs. My third encounter with someone who seemed to have access to the other world was when I first met Jim Morrison. His direct line to the other side hit me quick. I was jamming at Manzarek's garage when Ray handed me a crumpled piece of paper with Jim's lyrics to break on through. Day destroys the night, night divides the day, tried to run, tried to hide, break on through to the other side. Not only were the lines rhythmic, which I as a drummer appreciated, but he was talking about a connection to the void, a raising of consciousness. The words were pulsing with feeling of a seeker, someone trying to tell us that life is bitter and sweet, but there is something else. When we first met, the term shaman wasn't in the cultural lexicon yet. Even though I hadn't heard of it, I read it in Jim's poems. He was well aware of the technique of spiritual leaders in so-called primitive cultures and how they would take psychedelic plants, get into a trance, and heal people. Jim had been a literary scholar for many years, soaking up books and poetry like a sponge. He had started writing at the age of 14 and had volumes and volumes of journals chock full of writing, poems, rants, prose, stories spilled out of his notebooks. In later interviews, he said his life felt like a bow being pulled back for 22 years, then let go.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
he was different.
yeah. Well, there's a great quote. I think there's a great quote about Jim by Tom Petty in the book where he talks about Jim being a flame turned up all the way or something.
Right. Yeah, the late, great Tom Petty, a superb song craftsman. He said that these great artists like Jim, they come on so strong, you just got to get the heat off the flame while it's burning, And
right.
As time went on, it made it easier for me to accept his short shooting star, 27 years, and his gift to all of us. Not everybody has self-destruction and creativity in the same package.
Right.
Picasso lived to 90, so there's many roads.
Right. I think, like you say, there are a lot of artists, including people like Jim and Janis Joplin, who kind of were creating like crazy right up until the end. And I guess all great artists hopefully can live long lives and keep doing that through their whole lives. But yeah,
it feeds you. But also, if you're not one of these icons, you still can get in the same zone if you spend a little time just working on whatever you're doing, like just enjoying nature or playing a little piano or whatever. It's the same healing zone.
Yeah. One thing I picked up on here and there in the book was this thing where one artist might remind you of another. And I remember there was when you were in your chapter about the poet Robert Bly, you talked about how kind of his appetite for new ideas and just the even poems of his resonated with you and kind of made you understand Jim better. Does that sound right?
Yeah. When I first met Jim, I was not that literate. I knew about music. I knew all the music, and he was he would he would have poetry that inspired him, and I would tell him about John Coltrane or something. But then later, when I got interested in writing, I became kind of voracious for new ideas, like he was, and like Robert Bly is, and I understand that better now.
Right.
It's interesting. In my first book, I used this technique of writing a letter to Jim after he had passed, but pretending that he could hear me and saying things I wanted to say. And man, I've caught up with you. I understand. There's a lot of great literature out there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually the first book is great, and that is a really wonderful tool through the whole book, and it ends really well, where you're kind of catching him up on things that have happened after he left. It's really pretty moving.
And also telling him, hey, now the last several years, I've always been asked, if Jim was alive, would he be, cleaned up? And I used to say, no, he's a kamikaze drunk. And then the last few years, I said, I've changed my answer. It's yes, because it's a different time. And you can see like Eric Clapton or Eminem, another creative, angry, wild guy who's got an LP called Recovery or whatever. So it's different. And if Jim was around, he'd be on board.
Good. Yeah. I'd love to think that too. That's great to imagine that, actually. So, and I think you mentioned in the book too that in the wake of people's departure, you tend to, maybe your mind actually kind of tends to go toward them more. I think you mentioned that in the context of your mother and maybe Ray, which maybe we can maybe talk about. Is that true for Jim too? I mean,
sure.
Was that true? Yeah.
I mean, I had a dream about Jim that he was back. He was dressed in an Armani suit, and he wanted to play. So, I think I quote, in this book, The Seekers, I quote George Harrison, where he was talking about John's passing and saying that if you can't be close to someone who you've been close to, who has crossed over, then how can you be close to Jesus or Allah or whoever you're into, Yeah. So, I feel Jim and Ray's presence strong.
Yeah.
And I miss Ray's musicality so much. But we had it. We had this sonic campfire for a few great years.
Yeah, the chapter on Ray is it's a really moving one, especially, I got to say, after reading the other two books. And I must say, I was personally just happy and kind of relieved even to read that you had spoken to him before he passed away, and that you spoke with Robbie and had even performed with him. That it was a nice way, just even as a reader, to have some kind of closure on the earlier stuff that we don't have to talk about, but the second book mainly.
Yeah, well, the second book was the struggle over the name, and I just come on, don't call it the Doors. Play music. You guys are great. People want to hear you. I get it. I had tinnitus, so I didn't want to, and then I was into writing, but I'm just glad that they were out there doing it. But I just wanted them to straighten out the name, and that's all past. It's Robbie and I hang out now and play music, and it's healing because something came into the garage in Venice, California, the Muse, that was bigger than all of us, and something happened that was bigger than the four of us. I have to honor that. I'm very grateful for that energy, and so that's why, of course, gotta forgive. Right.
Yeah. Well, and as you say in the book, music is a healing salve, I think. at some
Right.
point. Can you talk about meeting Ray and the musical connection you guys had, and what was it instant?
Yeah. Do you have that clip with me talking to Ray? I think it explains it, or I'll explain.
Yeah. Talking about jazz with Ray?
Yeah.
Yep. That would be, Adam, that would be chapter 9, part 1.
Perfect.
Ray and I broke the ice when we started talking about our mutual love of jazz. I told him that I had seen all the greats at the Manhole in Hollywood. Miles, Coltrane, Art Blakey, Cannonball Adderley, Bill Evans, and so on. Bill Evans, Ray exclaimed. He was jealous. His genius is in his touch, I waxed. Yeah, Ray agreed, adding, Miles got crap for having this mellow white guy in the band, but he knew how good he was. Yeah, man, Miles doesn't take shit from anybody.
Oh.
I think that was the end. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I know.
Our love of jazz was our, the first song we played was all blues, a Miles tune, and it's in 3/4. So we had to. It's interesting tempo, like a waltz. I mean, you have to really know what you're doing, and we hooked right away. And then we started playing the blues with Jim. Jim was pretty shy. I didn't think he was the next Mick Jagger at that point, but he loved the blues, and we played the blues, and then he started giving us lyrics, and we started getting into the Doors stuff, and then the feel of the beat changed. Like the blues, you lay back to let the sadness in, and I had to play rhythm that goes with what Jim was singing. I always knew what to play just hearing the lyric, the rhythm of the lyric. So it's all a teaching.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the way, the Doors sound like no one else, and it's obviously part of it is because of Ray and his left hand playing the bass, and
Right.
the way you lock in with that, the way you might have done with a bass player, but it obviously has to be different when it's a keyboard player.
Ray had this ability to split his mind into two musicians. He's like a bass player, and he's playing sort of boogie woogie simple lines that he learned in Chicago. And on top is his right hand. Sometimes I had to pull him back when he took a solo on an organ with his right hand because he'd get excited. And there wasn't a separate bass player and me, the bass player and drummers are the rhythm section, holding back the tempo. But right. I think about not only does he create this gorgeous ambience, he writes these lines, this Bach-like circle of fifths for the intro of Light My Fire, or the long solo in Riders on the Storm. It's a freaking masterpiece. And these sounds, you hear 4 bars, you know it's Ray Manzarek. And
that's right.
That's the test. You just go, well, this is a great artist because they're unique. You know them immediately. And so he was really gifted. Wonderful.
Yeah. What an amazing keyboardist. And you talked about how both of you kind of felt the pulse for Jim's lyrics in the same way. And was that just right off the bat as soon as Jim was bringing lyrics and singing? You just kind of you all just kind of fell in together, right?
Yeah, I mean, Robbie brought in songs that were more complete. He had lyrics and music, Light My Fire.
Right.
Jim added one line, our love become a funeral pyre. Very Morrison-esque line. Lover Madly was fairly complete. Jim had these drones, like in the end and when the music's over, where we'd kind of play a drone sort of sustaining vamp, and then he would be free to improvise poetry. So we didn't quite know what was going to happen, but that was exciting too, because who knows? It's kind of like jazz, like in the moment improvisation, live improv, and then we'd go back to more structured stuff.
Right. Right. Well, since you mentioned jazz and improvisation, I do want to jump back and talk about Elvin Jones, who is definitely my favorite jazz drummer of all time. I imagine he is yours as well, since he's the only one mentioned in the book, or who has a chapter in the book. And played with the John Coltrane Quartet, for those who don't know, back in the '60s with McCoy Tyner and Jimmy Garrison. Just one of the best bands that ever existed of any genre. Can you? Well, first of all, you saw them live, right? I'm jealous that you saw them live.
Yeah. Okay, so I went down to Tijuana and got my fake draft card that said I was 21 to get into Shelley's Manhole Jazz Club. And, I knew these guys were doing important stuff, but I didn't know they were going to be these giant icons. But I sensed something magic, And the bathroom was in the back, right next door to the dressing room. And so I went to the bathroom a lot. I didn't have to go, but I went in there and I knew right on the other side of the wall was John Coltrane, and I could hear them talking. And then one time somebody knocked on the bathroom door, and I quickly opened it. It was Coltrane staring at me. Oh, yeah, go ahead. and then Elvin smiled at me, which was so fulfilling. And he, when after Coltrane passed, I saw Elvin play live, and I brought him my first book, Riders on the Storm. And I was worried he would be condescending, the jazz, sort of a higher art form. And he was so friendly. And I quickly said, "Hey, Elvin, I wrote in here, you gave me my hands." And, by the end of his life, I would help carry his drums to the car. And so a real mentor. And so I'm going to read a little section here and play some jazz brushes. You see these? And I've got a doumbek, a Mid-Eastern drum. I'm just going to play on that for fun. And let me give you a little taste of the Elvin chapter. All right?
Yes, please.
Elvin Jones, the polyrhythmic jazz machine and motor behind the train, crossed the tracks. He blazed a new path for all the rest of us timekeepers. He was the first to really free up the job of clockwork, improvising continually, but never sacrificing a strong sense of pulse. For drummers and everyone else, the steady tempo is everything. No matter what you're playing rhythmically, if the pulse isn't implied, no one's going to care or be moved. Native Americans say that the powwow drum used in their dances is a steady singular rhythm because it is the heartbeat of Mother Earth. We drummers and everyone else all know that our mother's heartbeat was the first instrument we heard. If your rhythm falters, if the pulse falters at all, the ensemble you're playing with would fear that their mother's heartbeat just stopped and they were still inside the womb. Song. When your beats have a consistent feel, the listener is comforted and can groove to the sound and enjoy the warm amniotic fluids, the ultimate homeland security.
It's great. You're making me wish that I had done this as an audio, that I'd listened to this as an audiobook instead of the old-fashioned way. But yeah, that's great. So I remember you talking about how Elvin's kind of the conversation he would have with Coltrane musically on stage was something that really it inspired you to do the same with Jim, right?
Sometimes McCoy Tyner would leave the stage in this long thing, chasing the train, about 20-minute jam. Coltrane would turn around facing Elvin, the drummer, and Jimmy Garrison would stay there with the bass line, and they would just have this primal conversation. It's just hard to explain the intensity of all the human emotions, and fortissimo to pianissimo and everything in between, and I don't know. I think it kind of, like in The Music's Over, when the music's over, Jim is spouting out this ecological poetry. What have they done to the earth? What have they done to our fair sister? Stuck her with knives in the side of the dawn, tied her with fences, dragged her down. I hear a very gentle sound. So I found myself doing that. What have they done to the earth? Just having this conversation, and then having a very gentle sound. I hit a little bell, and then I went back into the groove. I kind of think it came from being exposed to the John Coltrane Quartet.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now. Whoa.
Okay.
I was drumming and I kicked out the sound cord.
Okay, I'm glad it wasn't me. We're back.
Sorry. Anyways, yeah,
no
so that's what I think I got from the John Coltrane Quartet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, improvisation is a big part of the book, or a theme that comes through the book, and it's a big part of the creative process for a lot of people. Can you talk about improvisation in your life, even like as well as in music? Like I know you've been an actor, correct? And
the acting, I have a chapter on Peggy Fury, this very famous acting teacher, was Strasberg's protege. I kind of stumbled into acting, and it made me so nervous in front of 12 people without my drums instead of 12,000 with my drums. I thought, well, this will keep me out of trouble. The downside of a peak like the Doors is steep. And, some people succumb to drugs or whatever. And ultimately, I've realized from the acting that I wanted to write. I wanted to speak my own words. So that was kind of a segue into writing.
Yeah.
Well, what was your question?
Just about improvisation and kind of how it might play a role in other parts of your life beyond music.
Yeah. Well, for example, we're all improvising during this pandemic, where we're kind of involuntary monks and having to stay more at home. And, I really, as you, I'm sure, do miss live music terribly. But, it's coming back very small, but we're going to come back, but we've had to kind of improvise and appreciate what we have more, I would have been in Cleveland doing this with you, but because of the pandemic, I'm not. But then again, the greenhouse gases are down from a lot less plane flights. So that's an improv we can learn from.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and and who knows, maybe we wouldn't have been able to schedule this on the 50th anniversary of LA Woman if we were trying to do it, live. So, or, in person, I mean. So,
I just got into town about an hour ago. Took a little time to see which way the wind blows. I met a lucky little lady in the city of light. Just another lost angel, city of night.
Well, while we're on the topic, I mean, what a great album. And it's 50 years ago today it was released. Any memories of that album, making it or the release of it?
Sure. We had done Soft Parade, which is our attempt at Sgt. Pepper, and then Morrison Hotel, and finally LA Woman became back to the roots, back to the blues, back to the garage. And it was done quick. LA Woman was really, we did it in a few weeks. We talked about, we're just going to do a couple takes on every song. If there's mistakes, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. I said to Ray, Miles Davis said, or his engineer said, there's a bad trumpet mistake on Live at Carnegie Hall. I can fix that. And Miles said, no, it feels good. And they went, yeah, let's do the album that way. And then there's Jim's genius for, he's going to write about the city as a woman. And that's really something. You know, the cops in cars, the topless bars. I never saw a woman so alone. I see your hair is burning. The hills are filled with fire. They say I never loved you. You're a liar. You know, that's Southern California fires and Motel Money, Murder Madness, Manson. The guy was so gifted. Okay, so see this sign back here?
Yeah.
All right. I was born in LA. I know the town well. I've seen Densmore Street for years, driving on Ventura in the Valley. And a few years ago, I had a little time. I think I'll make a right turn and go see what's up Densmore Street. I drive up there a mile, and it crosses Morrison Street. So now, when did they name these streets? Several hundred years ago, right? I mean, whoa.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the two signs were not on the same pole. So we got the mayor of LA to putting them together, and we had a photo op, and then we made some like that one there. I bring all this up. Those two streets are just, they're in the city of the LA woman. You know? So,
yeah, that song in particular is like you said. I think you said it about maybe the Rays playing on Riders on the Storm, but both songs are stone cold masterpieces, and that the performance on LA Woman is pretty incredible, because and great drumming, by the way, because you slow down, you know this already, but you slow down and somehow just you edge it up until it's right back to that same.
Thanks, Andy, for saying right back, because that was the difficulty. You know, I was in Hawaii and I met Willie Nelson. And he said, hey, my sons, Promise of the Real, are playing in a club tonight. You want to go? I went, yeah. And then I meet them, and they want me to sit in on LA Woman. I'm like, oh, my God. You know, the most difficult Doors song rhythmically ever. And fortunately, it went well. And Willie complimented me, which was a great feeling. But you're right. The difficulty was, I knew that Jim had written Mr. Mojo Rise, and Mojo's a metaphor for sexual prowess in blues songs. So I said to everybody, hey, well, let's slow it down, and then let's slowly speed it back up, kind of like an orgasm. The difficulty, though, is that I wanted to try and land at the same tempo I was at 5 minutes ago at the beginning of the song.
Right.
Between you and me, and now everybody who's listening, I think I overshot it a little, but really fun to play. I mean, do. I mean, it's just perfect for a 60-mile-an-hour LA freeway ride.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. And, one thing we talked about a little bit earlier, we touched upon that idea of the incubation period in the creative process. And I think you talk about this in context of LA Woman. Maybe it's in this book, maybe it's in one of the others. Sorry, I read them all, so I'm
right.
sort of get them all mixed up. But LA Woman seems like it's a return to that, an attempt to return to that incubation period and rekindle that old fire, right? Is that
that's
same?
Really good? Right. Because we wrote everything in this Doors workshop space where we recorded LA Woman, and we had previously recorded everything in big studios. And you're right. We just get back to the essence of what we were about, and no extra, just the pure beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And not only that, I think you guys went back to group credits, right, for that
That's
album.
true. Yeah.
Just all the way back to the beginning. And yeah, it's it's definitely an album that has endured. Maybe more than some of the others. Can you speculate on why that album has kind of resonated with people still to this day, 50 years later?
All I can say is Andy, it must be the drumming.
I think you're right. That's great. Well, I guess I want to circle back and make sure we talk about a couple more of these fascinating people in the book
Okay.
before we forget about them. Well, you mentioned Willie Nelson. I mean, that's a fun chapter to read. Just you performed with the Sons and him, and you've been on his bus, his famous bus, right?
Yeah, I'll read you a little something from that excursion. Hang on, I gotta find it here. Let's see. Willie. Hang on.
No problem.
Do a little song and dance. Okay, so I said to him, hey, Willie, how old is that guitar of yours? As old as you? Willie smiled, and I continued, I hate new drum heads. I like the old ones who talk back to me. They have more character. Willie knew exactly what I meant. He had ridden Trigger. He named his guitar after Roy Rogers' horse. And for a long time, Trigger was a hollow body guitar that he was still picking on 50 years later, even though the instrument now had a hole in the front of it, put there when a drunk stepped on it in a club. I would say that the hole probably added to the seasoned sound, but what really made it sound so great was the picker, his phrasing, he like his singing, like Sinatra. He takes time. He has space in his music. And so, and here's the front thing about the bus. Chapter 24, Willie Nelson, redheaded stranger. The young bull rider takes Trigger home. Speaking of calm, this book's last sound tracker has one of the calmest set of eyes on the planet. It's great to meet a musician who's older than me, was my opening line to the red-headed stranger. Hey, he laughed. Not too many of us left. We drove down to Willie's, had a very mellow afternoon on the bus. Have you tried this, John? Mr. Nelson said as he handed me some of Willie's Reserve. I was prepared. I'd heard that Paul Simon and Edie Brickell had been there a few weeks earlier and left rather looped. Being loaded worked for Willie. It fit him like a glove. It wasn't for everyone. Of course, as Toby Keith sang, and I'll never smoke weed with Willie again. I'm a cheap high, Willie. Why don't you smoke for me? And I went out and looked at the ocean. The bus was by the ocean.
Right.
So that's a little taste of Willie. He's what, 87?
Yeah, I think something like that.
I'm 76, and he's a wonderful example of someone, as you said, who's real creative still, and that feeds you,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And let's see, wait,
one more little thing on Willie.
Yeah, please.
As we exited the door of the bus, I took another chance at being Mr. Nelson's straight man. Willie, how many times have you played On the Road Again? 6,000 times, he quickly responded with a huge grin. Well, that's about as much as we played Light My Fire. And then I took one final look at that twinkle and that beautiful craggy face that had seen it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could talk about sort of in the creative process, in the context of that kind of technique and training. I know, some of the artists in your book are as trained as you can get, like Gustavo Dudamel, while others are maybe barely trained at all, but still, genius. Willie probably, I don't know, well, maybe I'm wrong. Let's say
No.
with Jim Morrison, for example, not trained, right?
Well, yeah, you're right. Jim had never sung, couldn't play a chord on any guitar. So you're right. I didn't think of that, because I always think about how punk music is not very trained.
Right.
It's interesting. Like classical music, some of them are overtrained. They can't swing because they're so technical. So
Right.
you want to get enough technique to get across your unique thing, but you can overdo it. Like reggae is, it's sort of in the middle of the road. And but here's the thing about Gustavo Dudamel. He is completely aware of Led Zeppelin and salsa and jazz. And most before him, classical people are kind of rigid. And that feeds him. He takes it in. If he's moved by something, he doesn't judge it. He does, So I go backstage after seeing him conduct, and he says, "Juan, Mahler is heavy metal." I said, "What?" And then he hums the melody of the symphony, and it kind of sounds like a bass line from Metallica. I mean,
Right.
I never put that together, but he did, and it fed him.
Yeah. Absolutely right.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a delicate balance, technique. And once again, that plays into, if you're taking a solo and you're kind of showing off how fast you are, you can get away with that a little, but you got to have your heart open and space, and then it's more human.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like because of the training you had even since you were a kid, and all your exposure to great jazz drumming, obviously it comes out in the Doors music, and you found that sweet spot where you brought in the technique, but you never overdid it. Everything's very, in some cases, understated. You fit the song. It fits the song perfectly.
Ray and I talked about how we are not as technically good as these jazz idols that we worship, but we just let their influence wash over us, and then our unique thing comes through. Although I got to say, I played L.A. Woman with the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Right.
Let's see. Chris Martin sang the Coldplay,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a fundraiser for the symphony. And God, it was such a thrill. And I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? What were we talking about?
I think we were talking about.
It's not herb. I'm not.
Well, I was saying how you brought technique, but it sort of you were understated, but it fit the song.
Okay, thank you. So we finish, and we're backstage, and everybody's happy and partying, and I notice over in the corner is Herbie Hancock, one of my idols, And so I go up to him and say, "Hey, gosh, been tracking you all my life." And he says to me, "Well, really great to finally hear you play live, John." And I'm like, okay,
Right.
So yeah, I don't have enough technique to play with him, or I could, but it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, I mean, and you guys are pretty much contemporaries. I mean, they were. He was in Miles's band in the '60s in that great quintet that he had, right around the same time you guys were starting up. So I'm sure he was as aware of you as you were of him. So yeah,
And another musician, Airto Marea, is in my book. There's a few musicians that Emil Richards who are not probably well known, but they're just as talented as any of the famous ones. And Airto played with Miles and Herbie Hancock, and this is a master Brazilian percussionist who can take where's a tambourine and create a symphony. And make sounds with his voice. At the end of my chapter on Airto, I just deliberately say, listen, if you don't believe me, go to YouTube / whatever and watch this guy.
I did. That's a great video.
Did you see him doing all those sounds?
Yeah, I don't know how he keeps it all straight, but yeah, there's a lot going on that table. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gifted. So
Truly,
people have fed me, so I love doing this to them,
Absolutely. Well, for those folks, even the non-musicians, can you talk about just things you've learned from them, what you've taken away from some of these experiences that have helped you or inspired you in some way to live your life differently than you might have otherwise? I mean, is there any of that?
Well,
lessons you've learned from these people.
Well, for me, the long road is my road, like Willie, and Jim. Kind of, I view it now as kind of meant to be 27 years, but the 27 Club. Oh God, what is it? Janis, Jimmy, Kurt Cobain. Oh my God. I was talking to Chris Novoselic, bass player in Nirvana, and we were talking about the 27 Club and how sad it was that they checked out. And we're in for the longer run. So it's good to be an example of, different ways to go.
Absolutely.
I mean, what I gleaned from all these losing these folks is that life is incredibly precious, and that's the pandemic's message. Yeah. No disrespect to all this death and really sad stuff. It's just, wait a minute, life is really precious, and all of us can smell the roses more.
Right. Well, and can you talk about? I mean, just the act of writing the book was a creative process, obviously. Did you learn anything new that you hadn't thought of before, maybe in the process of writing the book?
Yeah. I started out wanting to say thank you to a few musicians. And then I thought, wait a minute, my mom, she encouraged piano and drums. And so I'll write about her. What the hell? Never thinking I'd have my mom and Lou Reed in the same book. But then I'm writing about Elvin Jones and I realized, whoa, wait a minute. The first heartbeat all of us heard, the first drum beat, it was in the womb. Mm-hmm. And my mom, of course she's going to open the book. I was in her womb. She started everything. So that surprised me.
Yeah, it was a really nice way to start. And a great story about her too.
Yeah.
And her art and
yeah. Now there's an example. She was painting up till 94, and she said her mantra was when she had pain, she painted. Yeah. So. Man.
For the artists and musicians in this book who are still with us, I was always wondering, did you tell them, did they know that you were going to be writing this book about them, or did you talk about it before it came out?
No, I didn't interview anybody.
Sure.
The prerequisite was people who have influenced me. Just a few minutes. I met Bob Marley for just a few minutes backstage. But I studied with Ravi Shankar for many months playing tablas. And so it didn't matter. It's just if they fed me, that was the main deal.
Sure. Any reactions from anybody who's in the book? Have you heard from anyone?
I'm very pleased to have Bonnie Raitt on the back, and John Doe from X that writes a beautiful thing, and really touched by Olivia Harrison. George was a real mentor for me, and we had so many things in common, and that she got what I was up to and said that it was really great to go back to these people that she knew as well, and no, they fed us all.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm trying to think. Was there maybe another reading we were thinking about? It might have been Lou Reed. Were you? That's a really interesting chapter as well.
Okay.
No pressure. Anything you want to read would be great.
Sure. Let's see. Lou. What a guy. God. What was it? Ostrich tuning? Do you know about that?
I don't.
he tuned his guitar. He tuned some of the strings down, and he just kind of hit the thing like a drum, like a percussion instrument. And,
right.
And that's where, at first, I didn't get punk. But then I realized, oh my God, he's just doing this street stuff that's so powerful that, I get it. So, yeah, you threw me a curve. I'm trying to find the Lou Reed chapter.
No problem. No, you can, anything that I have forgotten, if you'd like to address or read from the book, I'm up for it.
Okay. Since Lou wanted his music to be programmatic with the gritty lyrics, he used his guitar like a gun, pelting the listener with a spray of sonic bullets. I'm very emotional. Wait a minute, I got to do Lou's voice. How's that go? I'm very emotionally affected by sound, said the Velvet's lead singer. He tuned all his strings to one note and coined the term ostrich guitar to describe the sound. Then he would whack the strings with his strumming hand, percussively slapping all our faces. He wanted to wake people up. He knew exactly what he was doing. Sound is inexplicable like light, Lou rhapsodized. Ordered sound is music. Okay. So, there's intention behind all this stuff. It's very powerful. Yeah.
Well, I guess I would like to open it up soon for questions from our viewers out there who are watching live. Maybe in the meantime, I could just ask you, what are you working on? Are you working on anything right now? Anything we could keep an eye out for coming up in the near future?
Oh, you mean The Seekers Part 2?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, a fourth book.
I know it's a natural. Right now, I'm working on making people aware of the Seekers.
That's good.
and the paperback will be out mid-November.
Oh, good.
Who knows, if there's no surge, then I might go around and do signings in person like the old days. See people. Be lovely.
Maybe we can, we can have a paperback celebration right here.
Yeah, that'd be
good.
Great.
All right. Well, there is a question here from Cali Kid on YouTube. Does John remember Iggy Pop when the Doors played in Detroit?
Well, I certainly know Iggy Pop. He came to my play when I did a acting thing in New York, and he sang with Ray a few times. Wow. He used to wear T-shirts with Jim's face on it. He was kind of in the wings as a Jim's replacement, but who can fill Jim's leather pants? That's not an easy task.
Right.
So we did 2 albums after Jim died with Ray and Robbie singing, trying to sing. I mean, they're okay. They're not. But it avoided the trap of filling Jim's shoes. What are you going to,
Right.
That's why I was so adamant about Ray and Robbie not using the name, without Jim, like the Police without Sting and the Stones without Mick. No. Founding members, former members of the Doors. Yeah, go for it.
Right. And I think, you had gone out with Robbie in the past and called and it was billed that way. You were special guest John Densmore of the Doors, right? But you weren't calling yourselves the Doors, of course.
Yeah, but this is all water under the bridge.
Right,
And,
sure.
And
that's a great book, though. I gotta say, even having said that, it's it's a really good courtroom drama, and it's a good book about integrity and authenticity and all
actually
that.
There's some English filmmakers that are I don't know, chatting me up to make a movie about it. So that's kind of courtroom thriller.
Yeah, it's a good read.
But you know, I sent the last chapter to Ray and Robbie, saying, listen, I know this book's going to be a hard pill to swallow. I want you to read this chapter. It says, how could I not love you guys? We created magic in a garage, you know. And then when I heard Ray was really sick, I called him, and I was so pleased that he picked the phone up. You know, nobody picks the phone up anymore. And we didn't talk about the legal struggles. We just talked about his illness. And you know, I said, send my love to Dorothy. And I didn't know it was the last phone call, but closure.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it was good to read that, even as someone who's not connected to the story. It was still nice to read that in the last book.
Yeah, well, you know, the fans are so good and love our music, and we're so appreciative, and you hate to see your bandmates fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a question from Greg on YouTube. Do you have plans to play out when things are safe?
Play out?
Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely be doing a little more poetry and drumming. Maybe, I mean, Robbie and I, before the pandemic, we did a benefit for homeless, and it was at the Wiltern, a 2,000 seater, and actually that's when Chris Novoselic played bass, and it was fun. You know, I mean, I wouldn't rule that out.
Good, sounds good. I'll look out for that. Will you come to Paris on July 3rd for Jim's 50th anniversary? So the 50th anniversary of Jim's passing, from someone on Facebook.
Wow. Kind of depends on health. If things are better and I'm up for sitting on a plane for 12 hours with a mask on, yes, I will certainly be there in spirit, you know.
Yeah.
Been there many times.
Sure. And the Riders on the Storm starts with you
correct,
kind of making a trip there with Robbie and with Danny Sugarman, I think. And yeah.
Andy, you are well schooled in this Densmore world.
Well, I'm a librarian by trade, so I like books, but I'm also pretty organized, and I'm a Doors fan.
I appreciate your knowledge.
Oh, no problem. Likewise. Well, I think that was all the questions that were handed to me here. Any final thoughts, John, before we call it a night? Anything you wish I'd asked about, maybe?
No, I was thinking of closing with a little excerpt from Jim's poetry, American Prayer.
Please do, yeah.
That would be okay.
Definitely.
And I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and thank the Rock Hall, and yo Cleveland.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so this is a little excerpt from Jim's Prayer for America, and I think it's self-explanatory. So here we go. Wait a minute. I'm going to do it over, just like Patti Smith did the Bob Dylan.
Right.
Hold it. Can we try again?
Yeah.
All right. It starts without the drum. Okay.
Okay.
Got to remember this poem. Do you know the warm progress under the stars? Do you know we exist? Have you forgotten the keys to the kingdom? Have you been born yet? And are you alive? Let's reinvent the gods, all the myths of the ages. Celebrate symbols from deep elder forests. Have we forgotten the lessons of the ancient war? You know we are being led to slaughters by placid admirals, and that fat, slow generals are getting obscene on young blood. Wow. I'm sick of doubt. I'm sick of dour faces staring at me from the TV tower. I want roses in my garden bower. Dig? Royal rubies, like the Rock Hall. O great creator of being, grant us one more hour to perform our art and perfect our lives.
Fabulous. That was great. As you were doing that, the speaker that I have from your audio was making one of these drums resonate. So you were tapping into some kind of universal sound vibration, you know?
Excellent.
That's great. Well, you know, John, this was really enjoyable for me. The book is fantastic, so congratulations on that. As I mentioned earlier, everyone should go to our online store at rockhall.com to buy one of the limited number of signed copies that we have up for sale of John's new book. And if you don't get one of those, go out and buy a copy anyway. I highly recommend it. So, John, we're honored that you joined us tonight. And again, congrats on the book. As I also said, I want to make sure everyone remembers you'll be able to hear this interview on Sirius XM in the coming weeks. John, any final thoughts before we depart?
Well, just a big thank you to you and Lisa and the Rock Hall folks and everybody out there who loves our music. Just much appreciated.
Agreed. Thanks. Well, everyone out there, thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you here at our museum sometime soon. Please visit if you can. And in the meantime, everyone stay well out there. So,
yeah,
John, thank you again, John, and have a good night, everybody. Take care.